Welcome to this Wednesday edition of the Flagship. I'm your host, Zach Berry. We've been absent from your podcast feed for a couple days. I was out of town, and then getting back into the swing of things, getting kids back on schedule. It takes a day. But we do have a special guest. You can see him if you're on YouTube or on our website. We have Colby Newton, the author of SEC Football, How a Regional League Became a National Obsession. He is here to talk about the book and kind of what inspired him to write it, and just kind of a little bit about him as an SEC football fan. But before we do that, if you're an SEC football fan, you might want to go check out College Corner. If you're in Oxford, Flowood, or Ridgeland, you can go see them, get all of your Ole Miss apparel needs. They've also got gifts, tailgating supplies, gifts, pretty much anything you can possibly think of that is Ole Miss related. You can get it at College Corner. Again, the new one in Oxford on Sisk Avenue, 4,000 plus square feet. It's phenomenal. Scott and everybody over there take care of us, and they will take care of you. All right, let's get to it. Colby, good morning. Welcome in.
Hey, Zach. Appreciate you having me on. Excited to chat with you this morning.
So let's take it all the way back. Let's rewind. Kind of what's your background? Kind of where you from, and what's your, I guess, tie to the SEC?
Yeah, that's a great way to start it. I'm from Salt Lake City, Utah, and got into journalism when I was in college, actually, and started my own website. It's called collegefootballwire.com. This was 1,000 years ago when the internet was brand new, and ran that for a few years. Wasn't exactly paying the bills. This was pre like message board times even, so it had to all flow through the site. Went from there and actually freelanced a little bit with Lindy's College Football, for those older people that maybe remember that magazine that was a big deal back in the day, and also freelance for the Deseret News, which is the Salt Lake City newspaper. But from there, kind of got into a different side of college football. I worked for 15 years in the college football bowl game industry, and that was really, really fun. I had the opportunity to stand on the sidelines at the 2007 Ohio State LSU National Championship. I was back in New Orleans again 4 years later for Alabama LSU, and have been on the sidelines at the Gator Bowl, Alamo Bowl, Holiday Bowl. So did that for about 15 years. And that was really my college football fix. But then about 7 years ago, I wrote a book, wrote my first book ever. I self-published it. It was about the BYU-Utah rivalry, and just kind of got that itch again, but wanted to see if I could
Are they still keen on calling it the Holy War?
Yeah, it's okay. The Holy War. That's what it's called. Yeah. And as the University of Utah grad, proud of how we've done in that rivalry the last 20 or 30 years for sure. But then I just got the itch to write another book, and I've been an SEC and college football fan for as long as I can remember, all the way back to really honestly Herschel Walker in Georgia when I was just a little kid. I was born in 1976, and Herschel Walker's the first football player that I remember knowing and knowing who he was. So honestly, from then I've been an SEC fan and wanted to write this book, and threw it out to some publishers to see if I could get a bite, and got Roman and Littlefield to take me up on my offer to kind of look back at how did the SEC become this Goliath that it has become, and really try and unearth the stories and the anecdotes and the history behind that. So that's me, and that's kind of what brought me to this point about this book.
So you mentioned working in the bowl games for years. I know you mentioned Herschel Walker, and kind of you remember him. But obviously you had to have worked with a lot of SEC programs and the bowl game industry. But I guess the inspiration to do this book, was it more about the legacy of just winning a ton and being the conference in college football, or was it more of like a little bit of a romantic inspiration where from afar, the pageantry and all of that, or was it a mix of both?
Yeah, a little bit of a mix of both, but I'm a data driven kind of numbers kind of guy, and that intrigues me. And so I started kind of looking at some of the history that obviously SEC fans probably understand. But from 1961 to 1990, the SEC won 6 national titles. And then from 91 until present day, they've tripled that. And it really started to get going in the early 2000s. And I just thought, like, how did that happen? Why was it so successful in the recent history relative to it not really being so much leading up to that? And is there a story there that I can kind of dive into? And the really the tiny part of it that intrigued me the most was the SEC on CBS. That's ended, right? This is the first year that the SEC will not be on CBS since 1996.
Yeah.
As a diehard college football fan in Salt Lake City, 2,000 miles away from the SEC, at 1:30 Salt Lake City time on Saturday afternoons, I was planted on my couch to watch that SEC game. I mean, that really changed it for me personally. So I wondered if that was just for me, what else is out there that helped create these national titles? And did the SEC and CBS play a part in that? What about the advent of the championship game? What about conference expansion? Like, put all that roll together to create what it has created? And I think the answer is yes. And that's really the genesis of the book. And we spent a lot of time in that 1980s through about 2010, diving into all the different pieces that came together to put this conference in the place that it is.
Yeah, I love the title, a regional league that became a national obsession. It's wild how it was early on. It was all just in the Southeast where yeah, you had alum that would go elsewhere for a career or whatever, but it was always kind of centrally located. And then like you mentioned with the winning and the money and TV, it just blew up. Because I'm glad you mentioned the CBS thing. I mean, that was always like the high watermark, right? Like if your team played at 2:30 on CBS, you knew that you were doing something right. That was like the benchmark. But yeah, like far reaching out to where you are in Utah or California, Oregon, whatever. I feel like it was always whether with SC when they had Pete Carroll, they were always keeping an eye on the SEC. Looking at who looking at the polls. Who do we have to possibly tangle with? Um, what's like is that the reputation out west? Is it big bad SEC? What's kind of the local take on what the SEC is, or I guess what it was and what it is now with all the expansion?
Yeah, what it is now is everybody knows it's the best league. It's the teams that got the best players. When Florida came out to Salt Lake City last year to play Utah, it was a huge deal to have an SEC team from the heart of college football come out here to the West. But it was interesting to go back and look at, it wasn't always like that. And there was some really great quotes that I came up with or turned up as I did my research. When CBS signed that deal with SEC, with the SEC, it wasn't looked on as, oh, a no-brainer, which now we look back and think, of course they did that, but that's not what it was like at the time. In fact, there's a quote on record from an ABC TV executive that said this will never work because what happened is CBS was the first network to put a league on nationally. Everything was regionalized. So ABC had their deals with the Big Ten and with the ACC and then at the time the Pac-10, and that's who you saw. So if you lived in the West, you saw USC play Washington. At the same time, Georgia was playing Ole Miss. You never got to see those SEC teams. So when CBS cut that deal, ABC thought they were crazy. And there's a quote that says, and this is the ABC executive at the time in about 1996, he said, there is no way anyone in Colorado will ever care about a game between Tennessee and Florida. And it's like, man, you look back on that now, and I mean, how wrong could he have been about that? But at the time, it was a risk for CBS to do that and to put these games on nationally. And they lost in the ratings the first 2, 3, 4 years. because they
Hmm.
were going against a regional game. But it just, everything was kind of starting to change at that point. That was like, think back to Tennessee and Peyton Manning and T. Martin winning a national championship. And then you go into the early 2000s. Urban is now at LSU. And by about 2002, 2003, you got Eli Manning now at Ole Miss. Things, it never turned back to losing in the ratings. They just got a bigger and bigger lead into it. But it was not a no-brainer at the time.
Yeah, you mentioned, Saban at LSU. Was okay at Michigan State, and then we obviously know about what happened in the NFL. It didn't work, but winning a title at LSU, getting LSU back to, you know, a national program, because I don't think a lot of people remember in the 90s, LSU sucked. Like they were bad. And, they were starving to win. Saban, you mentioned Urban, who was at Florida, and all the success that he had there. And then I think that's like where Nick Saban, people say all the time, uh, Nick Saban was underpaid at Alabama. He made so much money, with his contract, but think about the money that he made for that university, for that program, and then for everyone else, because it forced everybody else in the SEC, like, we got to pony up and we got to get better. Um, Through your research and kind of how you dove into the conference, you know, what did you, I guess, come across as how it became a national obsession? Do you think it was that, like, Saban kind of pushing everyone to the brink of, hey, we have to get better or we're going to get left behind, or was it something else?
Yeah, I think there's a whole chapter dedicated to Urban Meyer and Nick Saban and them kind of, raising the tides of the entire conference. Because you had Alabama that won it in 1992. That was the first national title in 11 years, which you just think back, that's crazy to
Yeah.
think the SEC went that long. It was Herschel Walker and then Gene Stallings at Alabama. And then you had Spurrier win it a few years later with Florida. You had T. Martin, I mentioned, in Tennessee, but it was still intermittent. And then Urban
Yeah.
shows up at LSU. I'm sorry, Saban shows up at LSU, and then Urban shortly thereafter. And those two really changed the game with it. It's funny you mentioned the history of LSU. When Saban was hired at LSU, he was not a top five candidate,
Mm.
and he met with LSU in his agent's house in outside of Memphis. And at that point, the chancellor at LSU, which was Mark Emmert, who ended up going to the NCAA later on, he had a quote that he said something like, "People still talk about Billy Cannon like it was yesterday," and that was 40 years ago. So
Yeah.
we need to change, and we need to change right now. And we think this Nick Saban guy is the one to do it. Because like you said, Michigan State was pretty good,
Yeah.
but he wasn't like the Nick Saban slam dunk that everyone thought he was going to, or that he ended up becoming. So what he did, especially with recruiting, him and Urban, that completely changed the game, and it raised the level of all of the other programs to really put it in that spot where it got to the point where it's a surprise if they don't win. I mean, Michigan won it last year. That's a surprise when an SEC team does not win the national
Yeah.
title. And the thing I think that people sometimes overlook is you got Alabama, you got LSU, you got Georgia now, that these powers. But I think, to me, it's the depth and the quality of the teams beneath them. That's what makes the league different than a Big Ten, especially right
Yeah.
now.
The one thing I remember, I was actually, I went to Baton Rouge for an Elite 11 event, which is the quarterback camp. And I was in town. There was a baseball game. I believe it was A&M and LSU. And so I was like, I'll go over to Alex Box. I'll spend a couple hours there, see a game. And ended up talking with a security guard. And security guard was like, "Hey man, like it's not super crowded. You can come down here and sit right by the dugout." So I was just down there hanging out with the security guard, and we got to talking about football and everything. And one of the things that stood out to me, and I think this is why Nick Saban kind of really helped the SEC when he was hired at LSU. As the security guard told me, and I've heard other people corroborate this story, where he got there and he was like, "This is it. Like, these are the facilities. Like, we got to be better." And he pushed LSU to, you know, The stadium was upgraded, facilities upgraded, practice facilities, weight room, treatment. Now the one thing they didn't do, as the security guard told me, when Nick Saban first saw the Pete Maravich Center, the basketball arena, he was like, "That's awful. Like, we got if you want to compete, like you got to do everything. You can't just be football." And I think that that's the big thing, like the arms race in the SEC for stadiums and facilities. It's almost like the offseason, hype video with new weight rooms and new indoor facilities. Like that's a big part of the SEC with, facilities. Because I've been to other places, other, Big 12, Pac 12, ACC, and it's not great. I mean, it's much better now because it's 2024, but mid 2000s, traveling around in college and I'm, you know, and Ole Miss was never super nice until now. But yeah, like, oh, you don't even have an indoor? Like, what do I feel like that was like what Saban did for the SEC was he demanded, hey, we got to be upper echelon, and I think that was part of why the SEC became such a power because it was just, hey, this is a business. We have to be better than everyone else.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I love that story. And the thing about it that coincided for Urban and Saban and the rest of these programs is they had the money to do it at that
Yeah.
point. And that really, Roy Kramer is a huge part of the book with the vision that he had with it, but the money that he started bringing in from conference expansion, which led to the championship game. There's a chapter on both of those items because they were so big, and then that led to the SEC CBS contract. But outside of that, there was some other things that brought the money in to allow those facilities to be built. And it's the vision that Kramer had to sign not only deals with CBS, but you had, even going back to the early 80s, you had a deal with TBS. They were the first league to sign a national television deal with TBS. They weren't content, which I felt like the Big Ten, a lot of times you'll see in the book through the 70s and 80s, were just content to be where they were. The
Mm-hmm.
Pac-10 at the time, content. We all know what happened to them now.
Yeah.
But the SEC had a game on TV morning, noon, and night nationally, and that brought that money in that just continued to exponentially grow. So now they have the ability to recruit the way they want to recruit, to build the indoor facilities that they wanted to build. I'll tell you a funny story that I unearthed in the book about LSU and facilities in 1928. Okay, 100 years ago,
Yeah.
the football coach wanted an addition to the stadium. The school president wanted new dorms. So somebody in the athletic department say, "Hey, here's a great idea. Let's just put the dorms in the stadium."
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Right? So they did that. Those dorms were in use, back to your point about the facilities not being great. Those dorms were used into the late 1980s,
Yeah.
and they were
Wow.
not great. And the football team even had to stay there one season while their dorms were being refurbished. So
Wow.
uh, I can't imagine what it was like to live in Tiger Stadium. Probably pretty cool, but you probably had to sacrifice some nicer things to say you're living in Tiger
Yeah.
Stadium. But I think that would only happen in the SEC, right? Like, let's put the dorms in the football stadium.
Yeah. I think Tennessee, I think Neyland, I don't know if they were dorms, but there were definitely some office space or maybe some classrooms in the stadium as well. Um, so yeah, hey, it just means more, right? Like just, hey, we'll just put it in the football stadium. It'll be fine. Um, we've mentioned expansion a few times. Let's get into that. So obviously it was 2012. If memory serves, that was when A&M, Missouri are added. So expanding the footprint. So A&M was huge getting into Texas. I mean, that's, one of the bigger states, bigger markets. Now you add Texas and Oklahoma. I mean, it was a no-brainer. I think, especially athletically, like with I was talking to somebody the other day about softball. Like the SEC is already really damn good in softball. Now you add Texas and Oklahoma, who are 1 and 2, I believe, in the current uh, seeding right now for the Women's College World Series. So that's going to make it even harder. And then obviously with football, you know, Steve Sarkisian in Texas they got it rolling. Brent Venables is, a lot of hype for them. In your research, did you ever kind of see maybe some Easter eggs or maybe some things that hinted at this, or was this kind of out of left field for you being out in Utah when this happened?
Yeah, I'll be honest, it was out of left field for the Texas and Oklahoma editions. But I think you look back on it, and we spend a lot of time in the book on the expansion in the 80s when South Carolina and Arkansas were brought in.
Mhm.
And there was a lot of that. It was totally open. It was in the press. They were soliciting new members, and so you had Florida State, you had Miami, you had Texas A&M. Were both very intrigued, but one wouldn't come without the other, and one didn't want to do it, and the other did, and so that didn't work out at that time.
Yeah.
Um, but how South Carolina and Arkansas got into the league, we spend a lot of time on because that's what really started this whole process of expansion. And what's going to be interesting in my mind is the SEC has historically added regionally. The
Mhm.
Big Ten, as we've seen the last 10 years, has not done that. It's completely now it's coast to coast, literally. What's going to make more sense in the long run? I don't know that anybody knows, but I think if you look at what the SEC has done, they've never made a wrong move with that. You had two teams leave the league, three teams actually, in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Tulane and Georgia Tech are the most well known that left the league. And then they added those schools back in later on. Florida State, the SEC was desperate to add Florida State. And when Florida State said no, you had SEC athletic directors publicly say, we're never scheduling them again. We're never going to play them. They're too
Yeah.
scared of us, especially the athletic director at LSU at the time. I think his name was Joe Dean, if I remember. And he was mad that Florida State spurned him and Bobby Bowden decided to go ACC. But same thing with Miami. And now you look at them. I mean, how badly do they want to be, turn back the clock and say, just kidding. Don't add South Carolina and Arkansas, add us instead. So it's been kind of interesting to see some of that looking through the lens of today of like, man, Florida State would give anything to in 1990 say, yes, we're in.
The College Corner is headed to Oxford. Stop by their new location in the Oxford Commons off Sisk Avenue. They'll have 4,000 square feet of Rebel gear ready for your trip to the Grove. On your next trip to Oxford, stop by the College Corner or our other great locations in Ridgeland and Flowood. Hats, shirts, polos, pullovers, sweats, t-shirts. College Corner has it all. And as always, you can visit us online at collegecornerstore.com. That's collegecornerstore.com. The College Corner, where your game day apparel meets.
Hi, this is Kevin Kessinger, former Ole Miss baseball player, son of Ole Miss Hall of Famer Don Kessinger, and dad to Ole Miss All-American shortstop Gray Kessinger, and your local community banker with B&A Bank. B&A Bank has invested 125 years in our communities, and we know the needs of North Mississippi businesses better than anyone. As a commercial lender with B&A Bank, my priority is Oxford, and I'd love to help you and your business with any lending needs.
Visit www.bnabank.com to learn more. B&A Bank, local, invested, modern banking. Member FDIC, Equal Housing Lender.
Call Drew Moak of USA Benefits Group. He can help you with any of your health insurance needs. Drew is an Ole Miss grad located in Mississippi and licensed in 7 states. He works with the nation's second largest health insurance brokerage with access to 35 different carriers, regular health plans, to life insurance, to dental and vision, and even Medicare. He has it all covered. Now more than ever, it is critical to have a health insurance agent who is local and accessible. So call Drew Moak at 601-953-8449. 601-953-8449 and get your free quote today. You think an undefeated SEC Florida State is left out of the playoff?
No way.
There's no chance. Well, yeah, I mean, it's been pretty, strategic and very methodical with how the SEC is ballooning, because you mentioned South Carolina. They were with the ACC. SEC, hey, we got to get up in ACC country, so let's go get the Gamecocks. And then, hey, we got to start going towards, we got to move west. We got to get into, Texas, Arkansas, let's go steal somebody from the Southwest Conference and get Arkansas. Now you're just moving more into Oklahoma and Texas with two of the bigger programs, two of the more winningest programs in the history of college football. I think it's only going to make the league more exciting. I think better teams, more games are going to mean more. Because I do want to get back to your point about how the depth of the league is so crucial. And I guess we can get into it now, because talking about Texas and Oklahoma, we did a podcast a couple weeks ago where we ran through the win total. I think it was FanDuel or BetMGM, released their over/under win totals, and that was part of my point was, hey, Oklahoma and Texas, you're not going to have these sleepy 11 a.m. games against Iowa State, or Texas Tech. Like, now you're going to go on the road to, Fayetteville, where it's going to be a Super Bowl for Arkansas. Now, Arkansas is not very good this year. It's still going to be a tough game because it's on the road. It's probably going to be sold out, and everybody there is going to hate you because you're the new kid in class. I think that's what you mentioned. The depth of the league is what makes the SEC such a bear and so respected, right?
Yeah, and it's fun to look through what's happening now through the prism of history. For me, I'm just kind of a history nerd, and that's a big reason why I wrote the book. But it's funny because when Arkansas was thinking about joining the league, the head coach at the time told the AD, he said, "You're crazy. I don't think we should do this. You think it's hard? You think it's hard to play Texas right now? At the time, Arkansas and Texas are in the Southwest Conference." He said, "There's 10 Texases over there."
Yeah.
And so now Texas and Oklahoma, like you're saying, it's going to be a different world for them. And they like you said, that sleepy 11 a.m. game against Iowa State, man, it just doesn't really exist in the SEC. So it's going to be fun to see what happens with those two.
Yeah.
It just reminded me of a funny story that was in the book when the commissioner, Roy Kramer, at the time was courting Arkansas. They had a secret meeting in a little motel outside of Memphis, and no one knew at that time that Arkansas was talking to the SEC, because it would basically implode the SWC, and it'd be the first time one major team has jumped from one league to another. Most of the times it had been independent, like Penn State going to the Big Ten, they were an independent, so it didn't hurt anybody. So they didn't want word to get out. So Kramer shows up with his deputy commissioner at this hotel, and there's TV cameras everywhere. And he's like, "Oh my gosh, word is out. I can't believe it." He keeps walking through the lobby, and it turns out it's like the Southwest Mississippi beauty contest. And nobody knows that Roy Kramer's there. Nobody knows that Arkansas is there. Nobody bothers them. And, the rest is history. Arkansas joins the league. But it's like, can you imagine that happening now? Greg Sankey shows up at a hotel, and no one knows who he is, and the cameras are not there for them. They're there for the beauty contest. So things have changed a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, now with Flight Tracker and somebody, I've wondered that, like, did Flight Tracker see an increase in traffic, or with coaching search season, everybody's on there trying to track jets and see where they're going. Let's before we get, I want to ask you a little bit more specifically about Ole Miss, and we'll get into to kind of your introduction to Ole Miss and what you know about them. But before we do that, I do want to remind everybody, show is also brought to you by USA Benefits Group and our good buddy Drew Moak. If you're looking to cut your health insurance premiums by as much as 20 to 30%, you can give him a call, 601-953-8449. He's an Ole Miss grad. He's located in Mississippi, but he's also licensed in 7 states. So he is local and accessible, but he can also help you out if you are not in Mississippi. He works with the nation's second largest health insurance brokerage, and he has access to 35 different carriers. So he can help you with everything from regular health plans to life insurance, dental, vision, Medicare. He's got it all covered. And if you check him out at usabg.com/DMOAK, you can get a free quote today. All right. So Colby, let's get into it. You mentioned Eli Manning earlier. That was, I don't know how, when you're, I guess you can just tell me, when did you kind of discover Ole Miss? Like, was there a game or was there a player or something that happened where you were like, oh, like this school's over in Mississippi and they're in the SEC?
That's a good question. I've never been asked that, Zach. It seems like I remember seeing Ole Miss in an Independence Bowl years
Yeah.
back. That was probably one of the first times that I really started paying attention. And then, honestly, probably Eli Manning is what put Ole Miss on the map for me, and I don't know how many other people. And we talk a lot about that in the book. I'm a history, football, an NFL history fan, and even though I wasn't alive to see Archie Manning play for the Saints, I had his football cards, and knew that he played for Ole Miss. So, and we spent a lot of time in the book on that, talking about how did Archie end up at Ole Miss, what was his time like there, and how did he kind of start this first family of the SEC with then his two sons, and now ironically his grandson, who didn't sign with an SEC team, is in the SEC. So
Yeah.
that the first family of the SEC legacy will continue. And we got some pretty cool stories in the book about the Mannings. One of my favorites is that Archie played in the very first nationally televised night game
Yeah.
ever, and it was pushed to an 8:30 local kickoff because, of course, ABC had to show the Lawrence Welk show first. So there was some funny articles in the local papers that I found where the sports columnist was not happy that he had to, quote, twiddle his thumbs during the Lawrence Welk show until he could watch Archie Manning play. So yeah, that's kind of that's my background with Ole Miss.
And that was, I mean, Ole Miss lost to Alabama, but Archie threw for 436 yards. This is what 1969.
Yeah, I want to say
Archie,
68. Yep, something like that.
he threw the ball 52 times back then. Like that was unheard of. Ran for 100 yards. Um, just 842 yards of total offense. First night game ever. I mean, you want to talk about just home run. At that point, everybody was like, okay, we've got it figured out. Um, yeah, the Manning stuff is great. Like I know a couple weeks ago, the Grove Collective did a big event with Eli, um, the Walker Jones from the Grove Collective, and then Jackson Dart, the current quarterback. They did a whole event, and there was a funny quote from Eli where he was talking about, his dad went to Ole Miss, he went to Ole Miss, and then he said that Peyton couldn't get into Ole Miss, so he went to Tennessee, which is great. But yeah, it's always been. I think that's pretty much it. It's pretty much the Mannings and the Grove, which kind of puts Ole Miss on the map in sports, in football specifically. Have you ever been to Ole Miss? You ever been to Oxford?
I've never been to Oxford. It's one
Okay.
of the few SEC campuses and stadiums I've not been to, and definitely want to get out there. I've heard so many amazing things about the Grove and what that experience is like, and would love to get out there. And it's definitely, the Mannings are a big part of it. We spent some time in the book on John Vaught as well,
Yeah.
and what he meant to the program and how big of a deal Ole Miss football was in the 1950s. That was a
Yeah.
big deal, and they were a big program. It was funny, you look back on it, the coaches had the ability to control their schedules. So there's all
Yeah.
this talk right now about the SEC, and do they play 8 games? Do they play 9 games? It's always been this way with the SEC. And back then they were only playing 6 games. And Alabama, with Bear Bryant, was kind of the other main program. They never played. And
Yeah.
and Vaught would tell his kids, Bear Bryant doesn't want to play us. And then Bear Bryant would tell his kids, hey, Ole Miss doesn't want to play us. But really, there was a gentleman's agreement between the two coaches that said, we're not going to play each other, which is
Yeah.
hilarious to me. So yeah, that's something else I wanted to point out to the Ole Miss fans is we talk about John Vaught in the book, and what a great history Ole Miss has with college football. And Jackson Dart, now he actually played high school down the street from where I'm sitting,
Yeah.
right in Corner Canyon High School, where some of my kids go. So it's fun Now, in our little local community, we watch every Ole Miss game because Jackson Dart came from right here. So there's some little connections between us and Ole Miss as well.
Yeah, so that's a good segue. I was gonna ask you about that. So Jackson Dart goes from, I wouldn't say completely unknown, but wasn't a big time recruit, and then just sets the record book on fire his senior year. Um, Skyrockets up the rankings. On3 had him as a 5-star. Got the offer from SC late. Goes to Southern Cal. Is kind of just thrown into the fire with an injury to a quarterback. Plays pretty well, and then gets in the portal. Lane Kiffin ends up grabbing him out of the portal. Now he's entering year 3, and probably one of the more anticipated, probably the most anticipated season ever. I think it is in Ole Miss history.
Really?
Um, yeah, I mean, I don't think without a doubt. I mean, outside of, I would say 2003, which was Eli's last year, and then I'd say 2015 and 2016. Those 2 years were a lot of hype because it's after 2014 where you beat Alabama. 2015, you do it again. Chad Kelly was there, and then he unfortunately gets hurt in 2016. But I think this is the most anticipated year ever. Um, Probably arguably the best team on paper that Ole Miss has ever had. Um, from over there, in Utah where he was, and now he's at Ole Miss. What's kind of what do people think in Utah? Because I know that there was some rumors flying he might get in the portal, and I thought, oh well, definitely go back to Utah. His dad played there. There's a lot of will Cam Rising stay? Will he go? I thought that was like, oh, that made way too much sense. Like he'll go back to Utah, he'll play for Kyle Whittingham, and he stays. And now, I mean, just after last year, Peach Bowl, 11 wins, first time ever. But going from Utah to the SEC, what's kind of the local take on Dart and what he's done at Ole Miss?
Yeah, excitement is the one word. I can see where maybe that was a thought that he would leave Oxford and come back home to Salt Lake, but I mean I don't know anybody close to the situation, but I never heard anything like that. I think he's really happy there and can see that there's some good things. I love to hear that you are saying this is the most anticipated season ever. That's really cool. And I think it'd be awesome for Ole Miss to have something that happens outside of the Eli Manning history nationally.
Sure.
Because that would, I think, really, and you had Lane Kiffin, there was some flirtations there with, is he going to stay? Is he going to go? And for him to end up staying and building what he's doing with Dart. I mean, I think Dart's a heck of a player. I guess I'm a little biased just because he's from my hometown here in Draper. But yeah, I think everyone's excited about it. And from I think a national perspective, it's fun for college football fans in general to see a new team in a league like the SEC. Like, yes, Alabama, yes, Georgia. Can we get an Ole Miss to mix it up and to win that league? I mean, I think that'd be huge. Back to our talk a few minutes ago about depth.
Yeah.
I mean, when's the last time somebody outside of Ohio State and Michigan made any noise in the Big Ten? It just feels like forever.
Yeah.
I mean, I know you got like a Wisconsin every once in a while makes some noise. Penn State just can't quite seem to get over the hump. But that's where for me as a college football fan, I would love to see Ole Miss rise up and capitalize on, man, most anticipated season ever. That just gets me excited.
Well, I think it's been cool to see, and I thought a lot of people got it wrong with NIL and with the portal, where everybody just assumed, oh, the rich will just get richer, but it's been the complete opposite. Like there's more parity, especially with an Ole Miss who has a collective that is well run. They have a plan. They stick to it. They don't stray from, kind of their morals as a collective. Like they have it's very strategic with how they do things with football specifically. And that's how you see an Ole Miss that's got a lot of top 5 preseason hype. Kiffin has been great with the portal and it's helped. And then you mentioned the SEC and the depth. I mean, Missouri, probably one of the more exciting teams this year. With what beat Ohio State in the bowl game last year. Got a lot of people coming back. Quarterback, you got Luther Burden. So a lot of buzz around Missouri. And yeah, I mean, I know Missouri made it to the SEC championship game, kind of the first couple years that they were in the league. But outside of that, no one thinks Missouri when you think of SEC football. But now it's different because NIL and the portal, it's helped programs like Ole Miss and Missouri, really put the Alabamas and the Georgia's feet to the fire. That's what's I've appreciated the NIL and portal era because of that. I think it's helped the smaller, the quote smaller school or smaller program succeed.
Yeah, I agree. And you bring up a great point. And I'm with you thinking that the NIL is not bad. It's really, really good. And I think especially in the SEC where you've got these passionate fan bases and these passionate programs where the passion hasn't equaled the success of the program. And now they're able to impact and put their passion out in a way that they can impact the program. And nowhere else is that going to be more beneficial than in the SEC. There's no other way to put it. And it's really, again, from a college football fan perspective, the more parity, the more exciting teams, the better.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's going to make every week matter even more. And I think it's great with the playoff expansion. I mean, that's kind of what's been the biggest thing for Ole Miss, where, hey, you're going to have to play Georgia. You've got Oklahoma this year. But honestly, looking at the schedule, at worst, barring something, God forbid, catastrophic injury-wise, Ole Miss could go 10-2. You're in the playoff.
Yeah.
No question. And then it's just tournament play. I mean, anything can happen, So I think that's what's cool about the playoff expansion, more teams. Like somebody asked, like a hypothetical where it's like, would you rather Ole Miss go undefeated and get to the SEC title game and lose, or would you rather them, go 10-2 and then make the playoff? Where it's like, okay, you can lose to Georgia and not go to the SEC championship, but you can still make the playoff and then maybe get another crack at them. So it's not the, back BCS, early college football playoff, you lose one game, like, oh, well, you're done. Or, hey, you can't lose another one or you're for sure out. Yeah, unless you're Florida State. So, but yeah, I mean, I think that's what's going to be more fun about college football, because I've said for years, I think it's dumb that they don't do a bigger field in the playoff. And look, you can, in my opinion, spare me it's a lot of games for these guys. No, the FCS does it. They've been doing it for years. They've been doing a whole tournament.
Yeah, I mean, high school football does it.
Yeah, I mean, Texas high school, like those kids play like 17 games a year if they make it all the way. So, yeah, and it's just more money. I think finally everybody was like, we're just going to make more money if we do more games, because it's just, I think it was a no-brainer. I'm glad that they've finally done it. But I guess last thing here, you've had a bunch of cool stories. I mean, any other anecdote or any other fascinating nugget that you found during your research writing this book?
One just came to mind as you were telling me that story or talking about the playoff. We talk a lot about BCS, and Roy Kramer was the brains behind that. The very first year of the BCS, Roy Kramer would tabulate the rankings at Sunday afternoon at home on his kitchen counter. That's where it was all coming from. So that's funny. But there's a quote in the book with Steve Spurrier, who was advocating for a playoff forever. And he was on the golf course with Dean Smith, the former North Carolina basketball coach. And they were talking about it. And Dean Smith was kind of giving Steve Spurrier some grief, saying, what's with you guys? What's with you football guys in bowl games and there's no tournament? And Spurrier said something like, well, yeah, how would you like it if you guys did that in basketball? Just had a bowl game type scenario. And Dean Smith got real stern and real serious and looked him right in the eye and said, we would never do that because that's stupid. And so back to your point of like, here we are, finally, 150 years into this sport, we've got a legitimate tournament that everyone's going to be excited about and everyone's going to watch. So it's fun to see that the SEC basically played the biggest part in getting college football to this point. It took a long time, and we went through a bunch of different variations of bowl games to BCS to CFP, but we did it. We're here.
Last thing, you mentioned it earlier, you're a numbers guy, you love the analytics. I know you founded a company in 2019 and, worked with Baylor, Virginia, a bunch of D2, D3 programs. How giddy or how warm does your heart get when you hear analytics on TV now all the time? I mean, Kiffin, he always talks about, the book, we go by the book. I know that Kiffin has a, I don't know if he's a grad assistant or, an analyst. He has a guy that follows him around with the book at games, and he will turn to that guy. Hey, what's the book say for this? Sometimes it can get him in trouble, but I was in College Station when Lane Kiffin ran a fake punt inside his own 20. And it worked. But as an analytics guy, like, is that cool to see more people embracing it? I know the NFL's big on it too, but is that something that you kind of, you kind of fist pump when you hear it like on TV?
Yeah, I love it. I love it. When I started that company, that's been 5-6 years ago now. It was, making calls and reaching out, and people are like, what is this? This isn't a thing. We're not going to do this. We're just going to keep going by our gut.
Yeah.
And we're still a big part of that. And that'll never go away, but why not have all of the information available? And then you can still make your own decision. You can make your own call on, do you call that fake punt inside your own 20 or you don't? So yeah, I think it's great. And it's only going to make things more interesting for everyone, the players, the coaches, and the viewers.
If you had to put a percentage on it, who do you in Power 4 college football, what would be your percentage on coaching staffs that utilize analytics now at this point?
Oh, now that utilize analytics, you got to be 75, 85%. I mean, I think everybody's doing it now. And again, that's a huge change from 5 years ago. 5 years ago, it was like I'm saying the craziest thing ever, and people don't even know what I'm talking about. So I'd say it's a huge percentage.
I'd imagine you haven't heard from Kirk Ferentz or anybody from Iowa.
I'm not going to touch that one. That's funny.
Okay. Well, Colby, this was fun, man. Well, real quick, let everybody know, where they can find you on Twitter, and definitely tell them where they can find the book and put it on their shelf.
Yeah, at Colby Newton on Twitter. And the book comes out July 16th, right around SEC Media Days. Publisher planned it that way. Really excited about it. You can pre-order it right now on Amazon, on barnesandnoble.com. All of your local independent bookstores are going to have it available on their own websites right now, and then it hits the shelf July 16th. And if you love the SEC, if you love the history of college football and the football in the South, you're going to love the book.
Awesome. Yep. Well, I'll include a link. You can find that on the site, on the message board. We'll make sure everybody knows where to get it. Colby, we'll do this again. We'll do maybe a little pulse check, maybe midway through the season, see how you're taking it all in out there in Utah. Hey, I know you'll be watching ABC this year. No more CBS, which is a bummer. But yeah, so we'll be in touch. See what Ole Miss is doing around September, October, and we'll talk again soon. But appreciate Colby coming on. Appreciate College Corner and USA Benefits Group. And you gotta get to Oxford, man. This is the year to do it, right? You gotta make it out.
I should. I'm going to do my best, and appreciate you having me on. This was really fun. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks to Colby. Thanks to you, the listener. And we will be back tomorrow with another edition of the Flagship. Until then, yeah.